The trope seems to originate in 1960 with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. That's just me guess, though. I haven't researched this. Who do you think I am? Lindsay Ellis. Well, it would appear that I have been summoned. So since this topic is never gonna go away, apparently ContraPoints and I were, planning on doing, like, a collab of sorts. But the thing is, like, both of us are really bad at scheduling and we couldn't, like, really figure anything out. And then someone sniped, like, half me talking points. I don't know. I figure this topic is, like, half of all we ever talk about. So we may as well monetize it, So, do you wanna collab on the psycho part? Or do you? Why don't I do the psycho part? I'm gonna do the psycho part. It's happening. Whore. So, you know what that means. That's right. This is a feud. A YouTuber feud. That's right, we re-feuding. Leave us a comment for who you think should win. And this isn't like a regular feud. This is like a cool feud. This feud has merchandise. No, really. You can go to me store and buy one of these 2 pins based on who you think should win the feud. Whoever sells the most pins wins. And 100 of the profits for these pins will go to the aptly named sir not appearing in this film. Yeah. So the last time I named which charity I was going to give merchandise profits to, they got threatened with legal action. And because the F worked in collusion with Lindsay Ellis to create the monetized video, the F is also culpable for the copyright infringement and the defamation. So yeah, it's unnamed charity benefiting trans youths. A variety of them. A melange. A rainbow, you might say. This is why we can't have nice things. So I did a Death of the Author addendum last year after a bunch of people asked me questions about the applicability of Death of the Author to the works of Joanne Rowling in light of her new philosophy. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may not be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside, which led to all sorts of fun feedback from viewers of other fine YouTube channels, such as Reader of Books, Vanessa LeBlanc. The opinions you're going to hear today are from someone who is not just, on Twitter, hearing what other people have to say and hopping on a bandwagon. This is because I read the book. She totally read it. At the very most, the concept of being a transvestite makes a very quick, brief, fleeting appearance in the book, and it's extremely unimportant. It comes in the form of one line in the book, one page in a 900-page book. And master of cell phones, Gary of Swindon. Society is built around the interactions between men and women, and so it's not surprising that they would have quite a formalized and baked-in set of rules. 5 minutes later. Why would we need to do anything in its purest, pure form? What has Lindsay Ellis ever done in her entire life that was of the purest, pure form? The answer is nothing. It's not gonna be exactly as it should be conceptually, but you just have to deal with that. I am just gonna say, I haven't read this book. I don't even know if it's out yet, actually. Although my personal favorite came from one of Gary's fans who emailed me to scold me because they thought that Death of the Author I was literally advocating for the murder of J.K. Rowling. The thinkery. So much of the chicanery stemmed from a misrepresentation of J.K.'s argument, which is that she's just stating biology goes. She's not denying people's humanity. I don't hate trans people. But what is wrong with the trans activists that they think biology isn't real? Jaker. is being cancelled for stating a fact. Well, that's just cancelled culture run amok. But while a huge component against discrimination against trans people is biological in nature, namely the denial of health care and medical gatekeeping, it is in this context completely besides the point. No one is saying biology isn't real. That's why the health care thing is such a big deal, because of the biology. So for some people to reframe this discussion like trans activists are denying biology and that they are simply in their thinkery ways arguing against this obvious falsehood, well, that is how Sharon and Mike from Dayton, Ohio first understand the argument. Joanne and Vanessa and Gary arguing against a point that no one is making. But since that's the point that Sharon and Mike are seeing argued against, that is what Sharon and Mike think that the trans activists actually believe. So as with a lot of reactionary movements, much of the anti-trans ideology is rooted in an appeal to common sense. And there really is something to this idea of using common sense as a rhetorical device. If a new or challenging idea is presented, all you need to do is look at the camera and be like, common sense. Am I right? And it's effective because by appealing to common sense, the viewer/reader does need to challenge preconceptions. Like this cholera outbreak, common sense says it's the miasma. Germ theory, you can't even see those. Which is why all of these debates are so frustrating, because to the Ben Shapiro's and the Joanna Rowlings of the world, trans people existing doesn't have anything to do with them or their lives, but there is something inherently threatening about their acceptance by society. So they have to make up scenarios where it does have things to do with them. And they try to sell these scenarios with a very shallow brand of common sense. What if penis in bathroom? What if I'm dating on and I get tricked? And of course, that old reactionary classic, want is someone to think of the children. So want is someone to think of the children is a staple of every reactionary movement. Ever so very show If society progresses 1 inch, reactionaries are going to use the children as a shield. The ancients among us might remember. It wasn't that long ago that was the argument used against gay marriage. How am I supposed to explain to me child? Hang your shitty child for all I care. Michaeli will just have to figure out how to navigate a world where the gays are allowed to kiss in public on her own. Yes, if you steal me shit, I'm allowed to steal your shit. That's how it works, whore. So what people hear when they see these very intellectually honest thinkers decrying the cancellation of rowling is that all Joanne said was that biological sex is real, and that trans people are being mean to her on the internet because she was just stating a simple scientific fact. Guys. And all of this stems from an essay Joanne wrote back in June called Turf Wars, in which she explained why she was so deeply concerned about the encroaching menace of trans rights. Her essay was even awarded the 2020 Russell Prize by Theb. So now we know you can win awards for essays that have sections ranging from wild misrepresentations of the truth to flat-out lies. And so for those of you who haven't read it, which I'm guessing is most of you, here is a quick rundown of the points she makes in her essay. I was cancelled for liking some tweets and then standing up for this woman whose place of employment declined to renew her contract after her contract expired because she was a dicto trans coworker. For people who don't know, last December I tweeted me support for Maya Forstater, a tax specialist who'd lost her job for what were deemed transphobic tweets. She took her case to an employment tribunal asking the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in law. Judge Taylor ruled that it wasn't. Here's incidentally what the judge actually said. I conclude from the totality of the evidence that Forstater is absolutist in her view of sex, and it is a core component of her belief that she will refer to a person by the sex she considers appropriate even if it violates their dignity and or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. The approach is not worthy of respect in a democratic society. The erosion of gender norms negatively affects charities run because it might accidentally give money to a trans domestic abuse survivor or something about multiple sclerosis. Think of the children. I'm an advocate for free speech. Too many girls who are being brainwashed by the gay agenda. I mean, radical trans activists. And they don't actually know what they want, and girls are transitioning because of internalized misogyny. Think of the children. If I was a child today, I might have fallen in with the wrong crowd and gotten transed. Like it's the Crips. Snoop Dogg over here like. I keep a black flag hanging on my backside, but only on the left side. Yeah, that's the side. Long Beach in the house. Yes, I know Snoop is a problematic. Leave me a comment about how Snoop is a... Why, how... As a Valcocus. How do you come about our once robust gatekeeping systems are being eroded, and now anyone can say I'm a woman and be recognized as such in the eyes of the law, and I feel threatened by that. The world is misogynist and porn is bad. Trans-occlusive language is misogynist, actually. I was an abuse survivor, so the idea of male-bodied persons in the bathroom triggers me. On Saturday morning, I read that the Scottish government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will in effect mean that all a man needs to become a woman is to say he's son. To use a very contemporary word, I was triggered. I could to shut out those memories, and I was finding it hard to contain me anger and disappointment about the way I believe me government is playing fast and loose with women's and girls' safety. This visceral fear reaction was in response to the Scottish government making transition less gatekeepy. Men in women's spaces is putting natal women and girls in danger. Gender criticals are nice, actually, and they don't hate the transes. And finally, think of the children. Okay, it would be so much easier to tweet the approved hashtags because of course trans rights are human rights and of course trans lives matter. scoop up the woke cookies and bask in a virtue signaling afterglow. There's joy of relief and safety in conformity. Come on, Snoop, work with us. So I need to make it clear that I do not care about Joanne Rowling. I do not care about saving her soul. I don't care about canceling her. What I do care about is her influence, which is why we have to discuss this at all. But in the context of this video, I am more interested in why these beliefs are even in her head in the first place. Like, where did her belief that trans women are gonna do a bunch of bathroom assaults even come from? Because it wasn't reality. Was it then the movies? Well, that's a complicated question. But the answer is yes. The mother half took over completely. He was never all Norman, but he was often only mother. Why was he dressed like that? He's a transvestite. I did not know that the Bates Motel was in California. Just like us. Snoop. So before we jump into the roots of transphobic tropes, we must first acknowledge that the understanding of sex and gender is always kind of in flux. It is a theory that is always evolving. That said, some very good faith actors tend to get caught up in this very hyper-literal interpretation of media. I.e., a depiction cannot be transphobic if the depiction in question is not of a literal trans person. Now, people are calling the book transphobic because of this, because it has a character who is a cis man who dresses as a woman when killing his victim. And no, honey, that's not how it works. While the idea of cross-dressing men may not be an accurate reflection of trans identity as we conceive it today, it certainly influenced the mainstream understanding of what trans identity even is. So a lot of the characters that we are going to talk about are not trans as we consider them. When a straight man puts on a dress and gets his sexual kicks, he is a transvestite. When a man is a woman trapped in a man's body and has the little operation, he is a transsexual. I know that. And before we go any further, big old content warning, because it is own thing to kind of, know about the tropes, but to like see them in rapid fire succession, it's a lot. Like, I don't even have any skin in the game and it's still a lot. So here's your warning. In Western culture, cross-dressing has often been used as a shorthand for deception, but not always maliciously so. In fact, for most of history, cross-dressing men are portrayed as neutral or more often comical. In the Iliad, Achilles tries to get out of war by dressing as a woman, but Odysseus figures him out when he gives Achilles a gift of perfume and Achilles blows his shit over the gift, like women do. In Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, protagonist Viola takes up service for Duke Orsino disguised as a young man named Cesario. After some comic misunderstanding and then lots of cross-dressing, Viola's identity is revealed and it's fine, compulsory heterosexuality all around. Well, I was hungry so. I was I have a zealous I was The benign cross-dresser motif remained popular well into the 20th century, with entries like Bosom Buddies, Tootsie, Some Like It Hot, and White Chicks. And a Need You and a Miss You. Billy Wilder's classic comedy Some Like It Hot in particular depicts a fun, harmless version of the very scenario Joanne seems so worried about. I feel naked. I feel like everybody's staring at me. With those legs, are you crazy? Now come on. Men dressing up as women to gain access to women's spaces. Now in this film, it's because the two men are in hiding. Two musicians witness a mob hit, so they dress up as women and join an all-female band to disguise themselves. Both of them fall for the band's lead vocalist, Sugar Cane, played by Marilyn Monroe. Well, see you around, girl. Buy sugar. And compete for her affections despite her thinking that they re women. No butter, no pastry. We Rihanna diet. Oh yeah, well sure. But Some Like It Hot is not only considered to be one of the greatest comedies of all time, its freewheeling approach to gender and even sexuality is widely considered to be the nail in the coffin for the Hays Code, as it was released without its approval and was a huge success anyway. The deception is revealed at the end with no hard feelings and an ending that "I'm good on level with you. We can't get married at all. Why not? I am a man. Well, nobody's perfect. Well, I wouldn't even call this a happy hetero ending. I use the example of Some Like It Hot to illustrate that even in the 1950s, a time of heightened anxiety over all things gender and sexuality, Kinsey, cross-dressing was considered inherently deviant. However, in all of the above examples, the male protagonist's heterosexuality is not in question. The joke is that we, the audience, know the hero's true nature, but the other characters do not. But the more, shall we say, influential representation of cross-dressing to Joanne's concerns also involves discovery about the truth of a character's body. Such revelation, however, is not comic, but horrific. So, what changed? That Gein was born in Wisconsin in 1906. The son of an abusive alcoholic father and a domineering, hyper-religious mother who only let her kids leave their remote property for school, even going so far as to punish Ed when he tried to make friends. Ed's mother, Agatha, was a hellfire and brimstone preacher who preached to her sons about the innate immorality of the world, the evils of drinking, and her belief that all women, apart from herself, were naturally promiscuous and the instruments of the devil. When she died in 1945, Ed was devastated. In the words of one of his biographers, he had lost his only friend and one true love. On the morning of November 16, 1957, Plainfield hardware store owner Bernice Worden disappeared. Later that evening, the Washoe County Sheriff's Department discovered Worden's decapitated body in a shed on Ed Jane's property, hung upside down by her legs, with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists, dressed out like a deer. Gein not only admitted to the murders of Worden and at least one other woman, he'd also spent the last decade digging up graves and exhuming the corpses of women who looked like his mother. He took the bodies home where he tanned their skins to make his paraphernalia. This paraphernalia included, but was not limited to, a waste basket made of human skin, chair seats made out of human skin, a corset made from a female torso skinned from the shoulders to the waist, leggings made from human skin, masks made from the skin of female heads, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face. You get the idea. There were other more infamous killers, sure, but none seemed to be so inspiring. The country was fascinated by Gein, particularly the type of menace he represented, a sexual deviant, an Oedipal nightmare, depicted in the press as a feminine and gender-confused man. Here, the guise of femininity does not hide or empower a clever heterosexual man, but reveals a sexual deviant, a man in gender distress. Alfred Hitchcock Psycho changed cinema in a lot of ways, and deservedly so, in my opinion. It's my favorite Hitchcock film. Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh are iconic in their roles as Norman Bates and Marion Crane. Techniques that may seem like old hat now seem that way because Hitchcock was the originator. We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you? The plot revolves around the murder of Marion Crane, who stops at the Bates Motel after stealing a bunch of money from her workplace. While staying at the Bates Motel, Marion realizes her mistake and decides to go back to her workplace to make amends, but before she can, oh, oh, no, oh, she's murdered by Norman's mother. Of course, the twist at the end is that Norman's mother is actually Norman Bates in drag. The film does not reveal Norman's identity as murderer and crossdresser until the end, in a scene that admittedly did not age well. Bat, 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 bat. It would be accurate to say that this isn't even really cross-dressing. It's a transvestite. Oh, not exactly. Like a Gein before him, Norman is diagnosed with a schizotypal disorder. He doesn't want to be a woman. He just hears voices. He quite literally believes he is his mother. Why? She wouldn't even harm awfully. But in terms of things that literally actually happen on the screen, Psycho is a film about a man dressing as a woman while he predates on other women. First, he leers at them in a way that makes it seem first. He leers at them in the bathroom, and then he kills them in the bathroom. And he predates on women because they are women, specifically because the mother personality is threatened by Norman's attraction to them. Mother, she's just a stranger. She's hungry and it's raining out. Mother, she's just a stranger. But it's men who desire strangers. And where is this most iconic of movie scenes set where this woman is preyed upon, but the place where she is most vulnerable? The bathroom. Thus, it is the figure of a Gein and his fictional counterpart, Norman Bates, who have captured the imagination of filmmakers and novelists rather than other serial killers. Because Psycho is inspired by real-life events, right? This idea of the cross-dressing serial killer wasn't made up out of whole cloth, right? It was. Life magazine, which ran an 8-page pictorial sporting the headline, "House of Horror Stuns the Nation," 2 weeks after Gein's arrest, announced that Gein wished he were a woman after an unidentified investigator supplied the Milwaukee Journal with information on Gein. The November 21st issue of the journal ran a story claiming that Gein's unnatural attachment to his mother caused an de complex wishing he had what he was done you pay view you well you what you when you zero where you and there the where you there you where they were you where you where you where you there He considered inquiring about an operation to change into a woman, and even thought about trying the operation upon himself, but did nothing about such plans. But here's the thing. None of it is true. All of these air slipped to the press before any real psychoanalysis of the Gein had been done, and none of the psychiatrists who actually analyzed him concluded that he had any sort of tendencies towards transvestism or even homosexuality. Indeed, he seemed pretty honking straight and resented women just like most serial killers do. Thus, in part, Gene's infamy resided in an indication that he was not fully masculine in an era that was obsessed with proper forms of masculinity. Gein is remembered as effeminate, a transvestite or transsexual, as well as the narrative trope that explained his psychosis. And Gein and the character of Norman Bates are often cited as the first examples of this trope, but that's actually not entirely true either. The book gender-bending detective fiction cites the 1950 detective novel Vengeance is Mine by Frank Morris and Spillane, which centers around a transgender killer who the detective has felt some attraction to, as an earlier example, and that was published 7 years before Gein even got caught. So, Gein and Psycho may have been the codifiers, but they weren't the first example of the murderous crossdresser. That idea was already there because the anxiety over gender roles was already there. Gens. We just needed an excuse to make hay out of it. So thanks, Gein. According to Richard Tifficat, author of Men and Monsters, Jeffrey Dahmer, and the Construction of the Serial Killer, we fail to read the serial killer accurately because he is an embodiment of society's dominant values. As a culture, we are so unable to admit or recognize the connection between our dominant forms of masculinity and violent misogynist crimes that we must attribute some other kind of motive to them besides masculinity. Instead, motive is attributed to perceived gender deviance, in particular, the men coveting or assuming the mantle of femininity through gender identification or homosexual object choice. What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve but killing? Acceptance in sexual frustrations. No, he covets. The 70s and 80s saw an explosion of films featuring all sorts of plays on the murderous crossdresser trope, with titles like Deadly Blessing, No Way to Treat a Lady, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, Deranged, Homicidal, Private Parts, Not That Private Parts, Stripped to Kill, 3 on a Meat Hook, Relentless, 3. And, of course, the most infamous of these is Brian De Palma's Psycho ripoff, Dressed to Kill, wherein the killer is incidentally a crossdresser, like Norman Bates, but a canon transsexual. You see, there's some men and women, too, think they reborn in the wrong body. They recalled transsexuals, and all they want to do is have their sex changed. Most include elements of the Gein mythos, stealing women's body parts after the deed is done, gender confusion, which brings us to, of course, the act you've all been waiting for. Goodbye. So, Silence of the Lambs, like Psycho before it, has the problem of being one of the best movies ever made. God damn it. See, this is why good movies are dangerous. This is. All movies are bad. Isn't that right, Snoop? You regret Mac and even go to high school, don't you? Silence of the Lambs is the story of Clarice Starling, a student at the FBI Academy who's on the verge of becoming an agent when she's tasked with profiling the cannibal serial killer Hannibal Lecter. I hate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. Pfft. Hannibal has no interest in being profiled, but he takes a liking to Clarice in his sociopath way, and he starts giving her clues to help solve the real active serial killer case going on in the world, that of Buffalo Bill, so named because he giving a geo seal the sigh they the 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 cow el go boo boo zero go 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 you go you go 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 you go you go go you do go go you see you whoa who I will you well who you you likes to skin his humps. Gender and power dynamics are very much at the heart of the film, which deliberately sort of flips the male gaze. Her boss doesn't respect her. Her colleagues leer at her. Others in position of authority turn cold when she politely refuses their advances. You know, we get a lot of detectives here, but I must say, I can't ever remember one as attractive. Only Barney, one of the orderlies at the mental institution, and Hannibal Lecter, a convicted serial killer, treat Clarice with any respect. In contrast to Lecter, Bill is presented as a deviant and coded hideously queer, a gay man who lisps and cavorts around his dungeon basement, listening to Goodbye Horses and carrying around a poodle named Precious. Yes, you will, Precious. You'll forget the horse. The first thing we learn about him before we even know who he is that he had a gay cross-dressing lover whom he's implied to have killed. Lecter is a gentleman and a scholar. Bill is low class and has a headwig and the angry inch aesthetic. Lecter appreciates femininity. Bill wants to appropriate it. Ow. Hey. Hey. Ow. The framing suggests that Bill is monstrous not so much through his killing. After all, Lecter is a killer too, because he's a man who sues, wears makeup, and desires a sex change operation, even though he's not a real transsexual. But he thinks he is. He tries to be. He's tried to be a lot of things, I expect. So Thomas Harris seemed to understand that he was putting something potentially harmful into the world about a group that was already stigmatized. So the film adds this caveat about how Buffalo Bill isn't a real tran, while Clarice makes it clear to Lecter, and by extension the viewer, that trans people as a group don't pose any inherent danger. There's no correlation in the literature between transsexualism and violence. Transsexuals are very passive. But these little disclaimers aren't what linger in your mind when you think of Buffalo Bill. In fact, everyone you've asked about it does not even remember this line is even there. But you know what they do remember. I defuck myself. He's making himself a woman's suit, Mr. Crawford, out of real women. Ow. I defuck myself. So Silence of the Lambs comes out, and suddenly those lying duplicitous trances are everywhere. During this era, if a character is transgender, it's usually tied to some dark and horrible secret in the narrative, and the revelation about the truth of their body typically is revealed simultaneously with the revelation of another secret of some sort. That the person is alien, a criminal, or even a killer. In 1991's Soap Dish, A scheming actress named Montana Moorhead is trying to steal Sally Field's job as a soap opera star by sleeping her way to the top, only for it to be revealed that Montana used to be Milton Moorhead. She was Milton Moorhead of Syosset, Long Island, Hello. And she flees the set in shame as the cast and crew look on in shock and horror. Montana's transgender reveal elucidates her deceitful nature. If she lied about being trans, then she's allier at heart, and also a slut. This is my moment. This is a moment. I have to seize it. In 1992's The Crying Game, an otherwise gritty drama that was nominated for a bunch of Oscars, a woman has an affair with a man who killed her boyfriend, but she doesn't know that. And you know, it's progressing pretty normally when, blammo, you did know, did you? Straight to the toilet. Although I don't super want to misrepresent this movie, like it is one of the more, like, sensitive and nuanced takes we would see for the next 20 years. And I gotta give it credit for its weirdly sweet ending. But it does seem to be the first example of a trope that was going to be really tiresome. In Naked Gun, 33 1/3, Detective Frank Dribin has an on and off flirtation with the villain's girlfriend, played by Anna Nicole Smith, which culminates with her undressing for him in silhouette, revealing this. And Frank reacts. But perhaps the most notorious example from this era comes from Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, wherein it is revealed that a female police detective that Ace kisses earlier in the film is the same person as one of Ace's dolphin kidnapping suspects, who happens to be a man, honey, a crazy one that went to a mental institution and everything. We re-talking paranoid delusional psychosis. I saw the guy's room. It's cozy if you read Hannibal Lecter. And when he figures this out, of course. Oh my God. Einhorn is a man. Then at the end, when Ace reveals her former identity by forcibly exposing the bulge in her underwear to practically her entire police department at the end of the movie, wait for it. Where her former identity entity where the party. One of the major indicators of trans women's villainy in these movies is that they do not disclose their trans status. Their trans status is used as shorthand for their duplicitous ways. The nauseating revelation that they retrans is typically treated as more shocking and important than any actual crime they've committed. There's no meaningful difference made between finding out a woman is trans and discovering that she's a criminal. There's also a sort of phobia of intersex and non-binary people, too, that was, I don't want to say all the rage as much, but it was definitely a thing in the 90s. Pat from Sil was a well-known example from this era, the joke being that no one can ever figure out if Pat is a man or a woman. I was in love with someone who was not what they appeared to be. Well, and what was it that Chris appeared to be? Exactly. A decent human being. And this was a character popular enough that they even got their own movie. We got it in Spaceballs too. I am the bearded lady, but are you one of the freaks? And in a 1998 episode of South Park entitled Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut. Cartman's mom is revealed to be intersex. You re a big fat ass, and your mom's a hermaphrodite. I'm sorry I never told you, Eric. But because she is a dirty slut, she also has slept with every man in South Park. And when they find out about this, she was a he. No, no, not exactly, but she did have a penis. One joke. One joke. Yeah. This was eventually retconned, but who cares? And yes, of course, there's Mr. Garrison. But I paid $5,000 to be a woman. Developed to the wall, mayo, thou, bow, ban, bow, 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 lily, made, to, This would mean I'm not really a woman. I'm just a guy with a mutilated penis. Basically, yes. If we talked about South Park, we'd be here all day. I don't really care. And in the 2000s, the bro comedy emerges. Dude, where's my car? In 2000s, dude, where's my car? A stripper gives a couple of stoners money for safekeeping and reveals her trans status when she demands it back. And, no. Oh dude, you re a dude. Guys, if the mere sight of a penis makes you want to hurl, like, how do you live with yourselves? I don't get it. The trans surprise is there in the 40-year-old virgin and the Hangover too. Both have their reveal and the idea of deception and shame for attraction and or sexual relation with a trans woman. You know what? Hiring a transvestite prostitute isn't helping me, man. What? Ain't nobody hiring no damn transvestite. What? What are you talking about? She was really nice, incidentally. But at least they stopped puking. You in Bangkok, sweetie. That's the reason they don't call it Bangkok. Oh, Also noteworthy that most of these characters are sex workers. In Family Guy, it pops up a few times, most notably in an episode called Quagmire's Dad, where it is revealed that Quagmire's dad transitioned at some point after fathering Quagmire. Brian sleeps with her, and when he finds out, "Are you done?" This scene goes on for a minute. Trans panic Pook walked so attack helicopter could fly. Literally. Also, like Quagmire's dad slept with a dog. And the dog is the nauseated one in this scenario. But it wasn't just stuff for bros. In a 2000 episode of Sex and the City called Although and Though the Zo Cock-a-doodle-doo, Samantha's not thrilled with thee. Oh, not thrilled, Samantha. There they were. Samantha's friendly neighborhood pre-op transsexual hookers. Oh hey, sex workers and women of color. Nice. I am paying a fortune to live in a neighborhood that's trendy by day and true by night. It's like sometimes it starts to be okay, and then, aha, don't I know it. Samantha always knew how to get her way with men. Oh goddammit, Curie. They party at the end of the episode, so it's fine, I guess, but, oh no, this episode is just, it's so cringe. No, Sarah Jessica Parker, stop, stop. Oh, what are you doing? No, I don't know. There's something about the well-meaningness that makes it even more cringe. Don't worry. They have a very lovely life. GLAAD did a survey of the representation of trans people on television from 2002 to 2012, most of which cataloged procedurals like in Cis and Law and Order and, because that was most of what was on the sun, so off what? But the survey found that transgender characters were cast as killers or villains in at least 21 of the cataloged episodes and storylines. The most common profession transgender characters were depicted as having was that of sex workers, which a fifth of all characters were depicted as. An anti-trans slurs language and dialogue was present in at least 61 of the cataloged episodes and storylines. But starting in the 2000s, the narrative also shifted, and we started to see more positive representation of trans people in films and TV shows like The Danish Girl, Transparent, Orange is the New Black, Transamerica, Boys Don't Cry, and Dallas Beers Club. Now there's this attempt in the mainstream to empathize with the trans experience, where before it was. And a lot of people feel like these efforts fall short, especially when a cis actor plays a trans character, which is. most of them. All of them, except Orange is the New Black. But even though that dose deserves some scrutiny, the fact is that now you have a mainstream who is ready, even eager, to empathize with trans characters. And, in a way, this is what's threatening to people like Joanne. Before, these characters were killers and leers and criminals and sex perverts, or all of the above. But now they re-people with humanity and depth. Which brings us to Troubled Blood is the fifth book in J.K. Rowling's Cormoran Strike detective novel series, written under the pen name of Robert Galbraith. In this installment, its titular hero, Cormoran, an army veteran turned private detective, and his partner, Robin, basically a young hot chick Rowling. Her face in the wing mirror was pale, her blue eyes bloodshot, and the strawberry blonde hair currently hidden under a black beanie hat needed a wash, are trying to solve a 40-year-old cold case of a missing doctor, Margaret Bambro. You see, Bambro, who was a gorgeous, strong-headed second-wave feminist, left her office one evening after treating a shady, masculine-looking woman who was never seen again. And everyone, including Bambro's now-grown daughter, assumes that Margot was an unconfirmed victim of the Essex butcher, a 70s serial killer who liked to kidnap women, chain them up in his basement, and eventually rape and murder them. And he dressed like a woman to do it. He likes dressing up in women's clothing to get off, and he uses makeup and wigs to make himself less threatening so he can gain access to women's spaces to lure them into a false sense of security for the easier murdering. Well, it's Cormoran on the case. Who killed the second-wave feminist doctor? Was it the Essex butcher? Or could it have been the ex-boyfriend artist? Or the medical clerk, who is so very fat and wears a lot of makeup? She's really fat, and she wears too much makeup. Like her sitting room, Irene Hickson presented a first impression of over-embellished, over-padded opulence. Just as blonde as she'd been at 25, she was now much heavier with an enormous bosom. She'd outlined her hooded eyes in black, penciled her sparse brows into a high, Pierrotish arc, and painted her thin lips in scarlet. Irene helped herself to another biscuit, frowning slightly. Janice passed around fresh cups of tea and coffee. Irene helped herself to another chocolate biscuit, looking as though she'd said something very clever as she reached forwards to take another biscuit, and a deafening fart ripped through the room. Or could it be the nurse who speaks like a Cockney cartoon chap? What? You know Dr. Brenner probably taught Carl a fence-off. He was an only terror when he was a kid, Carl, and he comes across as the kind of man who owns a garage. Or the questionably gay, I am sorry, camp man who just loves karaoke. And will Cormoran and the J.K. Rowling stand in finally confess their very hetero love for each other? So, this is 900 pages of J.K.'s worst tendencies. From phonetically writing out accents, he started dropping in, telling me all his problems, and he tells me how he's mad about this married woman, falling for his mate's wife. On and on and on about how odd her life is, and there's me sitting there with a kid of me own. What about me odd life? She had an husband, didn't she? To the cool girl not being like the other girls. To a predilection for describing characters, appearances, and weight so thoroughly and repeatedly that it honestly becomes kind of uncomfortable. Robin was trying to eat healthily in spite of her unsociable hours, but the almonds had long since ceased to be appetizing, and she craved nothing more than a bit of the pizza she could see an overweight couple enjoying in the restaurant window. A hugely obese. Okay, This is getting ridiculous. A hugely obese old lady came into view on the landing above them. She was clad in shorts. She was clad in shocking pink leggings and a shirt bearing the slogan, "The more people I meet, the more I like my dog." The only occupant, a small, obese, bespectacled man, wore jeans and a black sweatshirt. He had a triple chin, and his belly kept him a foot and a half away from the white formica-topped table at which he was sitting. Seriously, Joan, what fat person hurt you? In terms of theory, it's easy to read a lot of biological determinist second-wave feminism into troubled blood's influence. Second-wave feminists coined the idea that gender is a social construct, but sex is a biological prison from which there is no escape. Asterisk. There's a whole lot of flim-flam about gender roles and how strikes on again, off again flame/assistant is not like the other woman. Lots of women do this, men do that. So much rape, and men can't be trusted to not hurt women and do the rape. Except Strike, of course, he's fine. Joanne has a lot of opinion about not just the trances, but the state of womanhood in general, such as modern fourth-wave feminists with their slut walks and selfies and too much makeup, are frivolous little bitches who don't organize and actually work for a change like their second-wave counterparts, the good ones. Women who wear uggos are just reeling for blood. Actually, no, you don't need to be a full-on uggo. You need to be like a six to go into a murderer's rage because boys don't like you. That don't help a woman. It's better to be pretty. You all have a better life if you re good looking. Men always went for Irene, not me. Why wouldn't anyone marry him? I would anyone be What haven't I got that I'm a woman? Ev. No one suspects the six. Ancients. Repeated Janice Beatty as the police car drew to a halt outside her front door and she squared her shoulders ready to accept her fate. F consequences. You don't have to write the accent in Joan. We get that you hate poor people. Contraception is fine, but abortion is morally dubious. Imagine aborting your husband's. What the fuck? When you asked me to read these, I didn't think they would be this bad. Imagine aborting your husband's child, she thought. Could Margot really have done that when she already had that child's sister at home? Oh, to quote Voxcom's review of the book, It's the writing of someone who feels she has no choice but to bring some home truth to you, the reader, and damn the consequences. Now, you might be thinking, I heard from other YouTubers who totally 100 raid the book. I read the book. I spent the last 12 hours reading it as an e-book. I mean the hard copy. With overnight shipping, a long, obnoxiously thick novel. I am sorry, I mean the e-book. Reading it as an e-book. Shout out Toad Angelo for catching that. That the serial killer in question is a cis man specifically, and not a trans woman. It only ever really seems to paint him as just a pervert who looks cross-dressing but he's male. What do any of these tropes about women in general have to do with transphobia? Well, the book has this very Victorian men and women do some things differently and the twain shall meet thread. Much in the way that, well, the Victorians describe the phenomena as living in separate spheres. And to Majek, Rowling making the killer a self-identified man in the context of her public comments feels less like her trying to assure the reader that he is not trans, and more like an assertion that any man in a wig and lipstick has the potential to invade women's holy spaces and rape and kill them. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman and, as Avi said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is the simple truth. The way she describes her worries in her essay completely lines up with her serial killer's modus operandi in Troubled Blood. And no, I don't think it's a coincidence that these came out at the same time, summer of last year. And this actually lays in contrast to Silence of the Lambs, wherein Thomas Harris is even more aware than the movie of the harm a transgender serial killer could do to the trans community. There's even a whole subplot in the book where Crawford goes to the gender reassignment clinic. To even mention Buffalo Bill in the same breath with the problems we treat here as ignorant and unfair and dangerous, Mr. Crawford, it makes my hair stand on end. It's taken years. We're not through yet showing the public that transsexuals aren't crazy. They aren't perverts. They aren't queers, whatever that is. Hold on. The incidence of violence among transsexuals is a lot lower than in the general population. These are decent people with a real problem, a famously intransigent problem. They deserve help and we can give it. And Crawford's like, I know, but I know that and that's why we need to know. But who you rejected because we know Bill is not a true tran would never. The whole idea is the man we want is not your patient. It would be someone you refused because you recognized that he was not a transsexual. So even the author of the most popular example of the gender-distressed serial killer is conscious of the fact that trans people exist, that their perception as predatory has no statistical data to back it, and the existence of a trans serial killer would really affect the entire community. But in Troubled Blood, gender nonconformity isn't even mentioned outside of Dennis Creed, sex pervert, who wears women's clothes to get off. He soon progressed to stealing women's underwear from neighbors, washing lines, and even from his grandmother, Ana. These he enjoying wearing in secret. What? There's never any actual discussion about being transgender either, almost as if to say that there are no trans women, that anyone not assigned female at birth who appears feminine is using it to deceive woman in some way. In effect, every trans woman is a potential Buffalo Bill. I defuck myself. So Troubled Blood is effectually resurrecting a trope that is already really dated, you know, in the way that foppish gay hair-stealing besties are dated, but is still playing into a trope that has very real-world consequences, namely the idea that trans women are inherently predatory. And I don't mean to imply that trans people can't be predatory or abusive. Every group has perverts and weirdos. But being a pervert and or weirdo doesn't have anything to do with one's transness any more than it would someone's, I don't know, gayness or depression or whatever. But this is the association that runs deep in the popular consciousness. She was described in court as a predator who was a danger to women and to children. I can only surmise that the case of Karen White is one of the things that upset her so much. Karen, once known as Stephen Wood, appeared by a video link from the men's prison at Armley in Leeds wearing a wig, glasses, and a floral blouse. Karen White is a trans woman who is currently in prison for various crimes, a lot of them sex crimes, in a men's prison as far as the most recent update. According to this article in The Independent, White used her transgender persona to put herself in contact with vulnerable women. Right off the bat, the media inextricably links her sex crimes with her transness. Notably, the Independent article uses the prosecutor's interpretation of events and doesn't mention the defense's interpretation at all, saying there was evidence to suggest that her approach to transitioning has been less than committed, and in fact was designed to allow White access to vulnerable victims, dressed up in drag to gain access to women's spaces and lure them into a false sense of security. Man, at least when Jack Lemmon did it, it was fun. At least when Jack Lemmon did it. It's not me fault I didn't invite them. So this article isn't just a list of White's crimes, which are allegedly very real, but a pointed effort to paint White not as a criminal who happens to be trans, but spotlighting her transness somehow as relevant to her crimes. Let's take a look at one of the favorite articles TERFs like to cite as evidence for the inherent dangers trans women present. For the danger. I endure the Transgender inmates have carried out 7 sex attacks. Sex attack. I want a man who wants to make a sex attack on me. Transgender inmates have carried out 7 sex attacks on women in jail, despite the risks male-born trans convicts are still allowed to move into women's prisons. So conservative politician Richard Kane made this statement, which then went viral, and the Ministry of Justice has said, since 2010, out of the 124 sexual assaults that occurred in the female estate, a total of 7 of those were sexual assaults against females in custody, perpetrated by transgender individuals. Snoop, I know you re-not with the Crips anymore, but please don't tell me for that trans flag thing. Basically, This article talks about transgender individuals assaulting women in women's prisons, which let's assume that that's true. This word individuals is doing a lot of heavy lifting because it's assuming that trans women are doing the predation, but neglects the fact that most trans individuals in women's prisons are assigned female at birth trans men. According to the data, we do have trans men outnumber trans women in women's prisons in the book almost 2-to-1. So assuming that sex attack number is correct, it doesn't say how many of these 7 are trans men, trans women, non-binary, or whatever. So while the implication here is that men in drag are sneaking into women's prisons to assault cis women, they aren't telling us who is doing the assaulting. So if by extreme technicality the Daily Mail is not representing a falsehood in this article, and for the sake of argument, let's just assume that they re not, even though I have my doubts, they are relying on the reader's basis to connect the dots that trans women are predatory and are a danger to cis women. Also, all of the data this article draws on is a mess. Found out the hard way that the UK apparently does not keep nearly as good data on sexual assault as prisons in the US do, and just the way that things are phrased in this report is super confusing to read, and therefore really easy for bad faith actors to misrepresent. For instance, there are the people who take bits of data and clearly willfully misrepresent them, like saying 139 transgender inmates are currently housed in women's prisons, which is just flat out wrong. It's a lie. That was the total number of transgender prisoners in 2018 in prisons for either sex. But that comes with an even weirder caveat because this 139 transgender inmates number does not include people who have legally transitioned and have the gender recognition certificate that Joanne is so mad about. So people who are a transgender and have fully legally transitioned and ended up in prison somehow aren't even accounted for in this 139 number. So who are these people? How are they counting them? So it's absurd for them to claim that they can draw accurate conclusions about the dangers of the predatory trans because that data does not exist. And on the claim that transgender people are disproportionately imprisoned for committing sex offenses, another TERF favorite in the book, according to the book nonprofit Bent Bars, and like with so many things, that statistic is completely made up. But it sounds plausible, doesn't? Sounds plausible, because that presumption of trans women as predatory is already there, inside your mind, like the fancy "I'm sorry." So you have this combination of people with specifically anti-trans agendas spreading misinformation based on a misrepresentation of data that is already insufficient, melding with an extremely common trope going all the way back to a gene that there's just something inherently predatory about trans women. So while Troubled Blood definitely has an early 90s statedness to it, as Natalie put it, my enemy eternal, or you'd think that a seasoned writer like Joanne would at least put a new twist on the cross-dressing murderer trope. But she doesn't. It's just dressed to kill. Only in this book, the cross-dresser is a red herring. Spoilers. Spoilers. We have no evidence that trans women are any more danger to cis women than other cis women, in prison or otherwise. And non-prison related studies do bear this out. But we do have mountains of evidence for who is really in danger in prison. This being, of course, trans women. One statewide study in California found that when transgender women were automatically housed with men, they were 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than male prisoners in the same facility. And a report from the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics said that from 2011 to 2012, 40 of transgender prisoners reported being the victim of a sexual assault within the previous 12 months, 10 times the percentage of non-transgender inmates. Regarding the case of Karen White, a U prison spokesperson said, But surely your trans prisoners fall under the umbrella of all prisoners. So, what about them? The message is clear. The priority of cis women's feelings of being in danger rather than the reality of trans people being more at risk. And where do these feelings come from but the cultural boogeyman of the predatory tran? So, there's already been a lot of discussion by people who are not me and who actually care about this sort of thing, about the weird gender subtext in the Harry Potter series. Whether it's Cho Chang or Voldemort's mother or basically any woman in the Fantastic Beasts series. But, it was easy to hand-wave away with claims of like, well, Jake, but she donated to ex-feminist charity, or, they read children's stories. It's not that deep, bro. But it's clear now that there's always been this sort of current in her work of acceptable womanhood. In terms of actual personhood, no one should care any more about what Rowling thinks than, Sharon from Dayton, Ohio. Who cares what she thinks? The thing we should care about is her influence, and that's why we even have to have this stupid thing discussion in the first place. The International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association's 2021 review of human rights in Europe specifically said this of Rowling's influence in the book. Anti-trans rhetoric continued to cause serious damage in the book again this year. A prime example is repeated transphobic attacks by author Jack Rowling on Twitter and in her writing. Rowling Transphobia I feel value video The report warns that in some parts of the book, hate crimes had been steadily increasing, in part due to an increase in reporting, but also influenced by increasing hostility in book-wide media towards trans identities and communities. Mainstream media has only just begun to center trans characters, creative heads, and actors. You have shows like Pose, produced, written, and directed in part by Janet Mock, a trans woman of color, and also starring multiple trans actors. God may have blessed you with Barbies, a backyard with a pony in it, a boyfriend named Jake, and an unwanted pregnancy that your father paid to terminate so you could go to college and major in being a basic bitch. Or Sense8 produced, written, and directed by the Wachowski sisters and starring Jamie Clayton. Hell, there's even Difficult People's Lola, played by trans comedian and actress Shakin Anefek. Third airplane goes right into the Pentagon. I don't think so, bitches. That was a missile. And and Tower 7 was brought down by a bomb, whose transness takes a backseat to the fact that she's Billy Eichner, swork enemy and also a massive 90-11 truther. May your love shine as bright as the sun did on that fair September morn when George Bush pulled off the greatest scam in American history since the moon landing. On the character, Nafek had this to say: "In the quest for transgender visibility, we've only been introduced to sympathetic roles that rely on victimization or stereotypes in order to elicit empathy from our audiences. You gonna love Lola because she's so strong and opinionated and crass, not because she's getting bashed, locked up, or wrestling with coming out. You do seem happier than usual. Granted, that bar is set about as low as the burning temperature of jet fuel. So how can it melt steel beams?" Exactly. So while there's still the Ready Player 2 or Cyberpunk 2077s of the world that include trans characters with, and I say this very generously, good intentions of inclusion, while still falling on the spectrum of reducing trans people to sexual commodities, progress is being made and even embraced, which is why it's disappointing and almost surprising that something so archaic was buzz blood Pastrol, bio, bio, pala, bio, planasa, pizzo, pizziloso, pil, pilo, pil, pizava, clu, tele, iosis, cavuso, concept, food, covu, toad, coyo, coyo, coden, covu, coden, bio, Pariju, Paveo, loser, in terms of theory and media crit, I have done what I can do. But in terms of YouTube drama, well, only you can help with that. So I'm not kidding. This is real. All of the profits from our Feud merch will go to all of them. From Sir not appearing in this film. It will be a good one, I promise. Blame Addison Kane for me not being. And remember, trans women are not predatory, except for that whore Natalie. Leave me a message about how Hitchcock is a problematic too. I haven't heard that one. I haven't. I review probably the thou how hit it Okay, I guess that's it. I'm done. I finally have a dozen of my donuts, delicious donuts. They re downright donkey. And they are definitely done by only me. Yes, they are deep fried, dipped, and dabbed by mustard. And when I deliver my delicious donuts, I do the donut dance. Don't you want to do the dance too? What a delicious donut dance. If you like donuts, delicious donuts, don to dilly dally. Have a dozen of my donuts, delicious donuts. Hold on. I paused in the middle to record that clip. What does he say next? I am just gonna say I haven't read this book. I don't even know if it's. I'm just gonna say I haven't read this book. I don't even know if it's.